Hello friends, it's Kristie Marcotte. Today I'm sharing some cards I made using Paper Rose's Plaid and Watercolor Mix 6x6 paper pad. This is such a fun paper collection with a variety of colors. So one side of the pattern paper has this watercolor design, and you flip it over, it has coordinating plaid colors. I'll flip through a few of the papers. I did forget to show all of the designs before starting on it, but it'll give you an idea of everything that's included. And there are 2 sheets of each design. So let's go ahead and get started with card design number 1. I have some white shimmer cardstock for the background, and I cut this piece out using a stitched rectangle die from Paper Rose. I put some ATG tape on the back and also some liquid adhesive. Since the die does put that stitched detail along the edge, I want to make sure everything lays flat. I'll layer that panel on some green cardstock and then again on some purple cardstock. And all of my cards in this video are American A2 size, so 5.5 inches by 4.25 inches. I'll put my card front onto a card base. Now it's time to bring in some of the pattern paper. I'll be using Paper Rose's Alana flower die set. This is my favorite flower die that they recently released. It's so beautiful. So I used the same pattern paper, it's just the opposite side for different petals on this flower. I love the stitch detail on the petals. Now you can make a large flower or you can use less of the petals and make a smaller flower. So that's what's really fun. I'm assembling the largest flower, just rotating between that watercolor pattern and the plaid pattern. And I'll finish that center with the smallest flower in the plaid pattern paper. I've already assembled a couple other flowers, did 2 different sizes. What's really fun, you can kind of curl down the petals. You could go down or you could curl them up to add a little extra dimension. So for my flowers, I'm curling them in. So I'll do that to the other 2 flowers. It's a little harder with those petals on the inside since they're pretty small. Now I'll bring in some thin foam squares. I'm going to pop up all of the flowers, and I'm only putting them in the center of the flower. I'm going to keep the petals loose. That way I'll have space to tuck in some of the foliage I'll be adding around the flowers. So I'll remove the release paper and adhere them more to the lower left corner on this card. I started with the largest flower, then I'll work my way down to the smallest flower. Now just like that, it does look fairly plain. So I'll be adding some sprigs and leaves around those flowers. Now for those little sprigs, I used some iridescent cardstock from Tonic Studio. This is the Purple Rain color and it matches beautifully with that purple pattern paper. I used some solid cardstock for the leaves. So you can see how I have that little bit of space to tuck all of these underneath the petals. And on some of the leaves, if they're too long, I'll just trim off the very bottom because you're not going to see it anyway. The leaf and sprig die cuts are from Paper Rose's Little Foliage sets 1 and 2. I love them. They work great with all of their flower dies. And I will provide links in the description box for all the products used in this video. Paper Rose is located in Australia and they ship internationally, but you can also purchase their products in the US. So I will have links for both locations in the description box below. So now I'm working on the little sprigs, and on a few of them I did cut off parts since I didn't need that whole little branch. Adding all the leaves and sprigs really balanced out those flowers. For this sentiment, I'll be using the alphabet die set from Paper Rose. I used that same purple cardstock from the background for the word hugs. Now there isn't a lot of space to add this sentiment, so I will overlap the letters just slightly. I'll put liquid adhesive on the back and you can see how I'm overlapping just part of the letters. I'm also putting them slightly wonky, that way I don't have to worry about trying to get them perfectly straight. So it's working on the final letter, and the very end will go off of that white cardstock just a little bit. For a finishing touch, I'll add some white pearls. I'll put 1 in the center of each of the flowers. I'm using an embellishment wand to pick up the pearls. I have some Barely Art glue, adding a drop of that first, and then placing the pearl down. And I like to use the opposite end of the embellishment wand to press those pearls in place. I'll also add a few of the pearls around the flowers and sentiment, just to finish off the look of the card. So there is my finished card. I love how this turned out. And I did make 3 different cards using 3 different sets of pattern paper. So on all of the flowers, it's the front and back side of the same pattern paper. So you can see how beautifully those colors coordinate together, and you can get quite a variety of different looks from all the different colors that are included in this paper pack. For each of the cards, I use some iridescent cardstock for those sprigs. It really adds a lovely shine to the cards. And I'm not sure which one's my favorite. I love that purple and green together, but I kind of like that last card. It's very patriotic, even though it has the cream color for the background. Now moving on to card design number 2. Now for every card in this video, I am using the front and back side of the same pattern paper, just to show how easy it is to create cards using this paper collection. So for this card, I have more masculine colors. Have the plaid in the background, and I'm adding that orangish kind of a rust watercolor piece in the front. I did cut a stitch circle die cut out of that background plaid paper, and I'll be adding that to the front of the card. I used some scrap cardstock and filled in that cutout just so there wouldn't be a noticeable dip on the front of the card. I layered the plaid paper on some dark brown cardstock and then put my card front onto a card base. For the image on the card, I'm using Paper Rose's little foliage circle die, and I cut this out from some white shimmer cardstock. Put some liquid adhesive on the back, trying to get it in most of the little areas and definitely around that outside circle. And then I'll adhere it to the center of this stitched circle die cut. So you'll still see that stitch detail along the outside. I put my acrylic block on top for some extra weight just to make sure everything adheres nicely. Now I'm adhering this piece to another circle die cut. I chose a color that matches that pattern paper closely, since you will see maybe just a little peek of it along the edge. And I added that other cardstock piece just for a little extra dimension on the card. For the sentiment, I cut out the word thanks, use that same dark brown cardstock, and this is Paper Rose's chunky script die. It includes 3 words. It has hugs, thanks, and hello. It's a great general sentiment die set. I put liquid adhesive on the back, trying to get it nice and straight. Part of the letters kept slipping on me. Once the glue adheres, it's not going anywhere. Then for a little extra detail, I cut out these thin little pieces of brown cardstock, and I'm putting one on both sides of the sentiment. I have the very end of those little strips going off of that rust pattern paper. I was trying to make sure that they look like they were lined up correctly. I wanted to keep this set of cards fairly flat so I won't have to pay anything extra for mailing them. So for embellishments, I'm using Nuvo's Crystal Drops in the Morning Dew color. These dry clear. Put a couple in the upper left-hand corner, a couple in the lower right-hand corner, and a few around the foliage. And I did tap this on the edge of my desk to flatten out those drops. So again, I did make a total of 3 cards, just use different pattern paper for each of them, and it gives a very different look even though it's the same card design. It was really hard to choose a favorite from this set of cards since I love all the different color combinations. Of course, the pink card is very pretty. I love that plaid background. It has some dark brown, a little bit of green, and then the pink in it. Now moving on to card design number 3, I'll be using a card sketch for inspiration. This is MFT number 517. I really like the primary colors on this pattern paper. So I'm using the watercolor paper for the background. I have the plaid paper for that smaller rectangle. I'm layering everything on some blue cardstock. And my cardstock layers are an additional 1/8 of an inch to the measurements listed on the sketch. So I'll put my card front onto a card base, and I'll leave that 1/8 of an inch of the white card base showing. Now instead of adding circles as indicated on the sketch, I'll be adding a few stitch star die cuts. I'm using some more of the iridescent cardstock. This is the Firestone red color, and it's so pretty. For sentiment on the card, I'll be using one of the cut apart strips from Paper Rose's black and white sentiment sheet. So for this card, I'm using You're an Amazing Friend. And I will layer that on some of that same blue cardstock. On the left-hand side, I cut the sentiment at an angle. I did it opposite as what's indicated on the sketch. So I layered that on some blue cardstock. I will use some scrap cardstock and adhere it to the very right-hand side where it goes off of that plaid paper, just to keep everything at the same level. And I do end up needing 2 pieces to keep it at that same level. Put liquid adhesive on the back and adhere it about to the center of the card. I decided not to have that sentiment overlap the stars. Instead, I'll have the stars overlap the sentiment. And I'm keeping this card nice and flat, so it'll be another perfect set to mail and not have to pay any additional postage. So I'll glue all of these stars down using some liquid adhesive. Overall, this card design is very simple, but I felt the card needed something more on the left-hand side. So I cut a thin strip of blue cardstock. I wanted to adhere it to the left of that plaid paper, but there wasn't enough room with the sentiment. I would have had to cut that sentiment just a little bit shorter. So instead, I adhered it to the left in that watercolor pattern paper area. So I did make a total of 3 cards, and you can see on the other 2 cards I was able to adhere that thin strip of cardstock on the plaid paper instead of off more to the left. But I still think they all turned out great. I think my favorite from this set is the black and red. I love the combination and contrast between the 2 colors. Now here's a quick recap of the 9 cards I made using Paper Rose's Plaid and Watercolor Mix 6x6 paper pad. This is a very versatile paper collection since it can be used for any card theme. After making the 9 cards, I still have 7 full sheets of paper and then some scraps, so I can use this for another project later. I will have links provided in the description box if you are interested in any of the products I used in this video. Paper Rose sells such a fun variety of paper collections, it's always hard to select which one to use next. Thank you so much for watching, and I hope you have a wonderful day.